we have our whole notes, we have our half notes, we have our quarter notes, and our eighth notes. And anybody who is finding a fractional pattern here will also see that we have something I'm going to write down here actually. Or I'll go ahead and write it over here so that it's next to everything. One last one called I'll go ahead and erase this. Called a 16th note, which gets two little tails or flags. Note. Now the 16th note is nothing to be afraid of. Again, it does not mean that there's 16 notes in a measure. There's 16 beats in a measure. There's still 4. However, they are a little bit quicker in pace, just like the 8th notes were a little bit quicker in pace than the quarters, which were a little bit quicker in pace than the halves, a little bit quicker in pace than the wholes. They're rather small, typically, and as you guessed, there can be 16 of them that will equal one of these. So 16 of these guys equals 8 of these guys, which equals 4 of these guys, which equals 2 of these guys, which equals 1 of these guys. So, and that's a whole note, not a tune. So these are very small, so just bear with me here. They're not as scary as you might think they are. 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a. I'm gonna go ahead and have to move this. How funny. In fact, I'm only going to show you one measure of this because I want you to be able to see it. So we have 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 So we've now made this all one measure. It still only gets 4 beats, with the quarter note getting the beat, so that has not changed. The size of the measure on the paper does not dictate how many notes, how big, how small it is. It's simply, again, a visual aesthetic tool. So here we've got one measure here. I just wanted to make sure that you're keeping up okay. So again, just like with the 8th notes, there's multiple ways in which to write this. You can either write it with its little double tail, and there is nothing incorrect about that. Or, if you like, you can write it with 2 together. However, unlike the 8th note got 1 bar. The 16th note, just like it has 2 tails, gets 2 bars. So it looks like, I'll write it a little taller too, if you can see. 2 bars, just like that. Now, the third way to write it, and the most common way that you might see it, just because having to draw all of these little individual tails when you've got multiples of 4 can get very tedious for composers. Once again, when and only when you have 4, because this is the 4, you may write it like this. Okay? So you see it just like that. And with this, you have the 4, again, the multiples of 4, because we are in 4/4, and that's pretty much all you can do. Again, this is probably the most common way you will see this written. If there are enough of them to do it this way, you will either see it like this or like this, if there's multiples of 2 or 4. And now you may have heard me counting out how to count this while I was writing it, because I wanted to make sure that I had enough of them on the board. Just like the 8th notes were 1 and 2 and 3, and now we have to divide that once again to 1 E, and so it's written much like this: 1 E and 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and Okay, so you can see here it's 1 E and 2 E and So I'm going to take this a little bit slower so that you can hear it than I had before. So if you have a beat of about here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, you're going to hear it like this: 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and again, they're very quick notes, which is why sometimes they're hard to deal with, but there's no need to be afraid of them. They're just a little bit frustrating sometimes. So, now that you have all of these little notes in your brain, I wanted to give you a couple other quick examples just of key signatures so that you can wrap your head around it when you hear something and you maybe want to count it out. So, let's give a treble clef here. Okay, that's kind of a jazzy looking treble clef. So we're going to take it all the way out here, and 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 the 5th line down at the bottom. Right there. Okay, so let's break this into 2 measures. We'll just split it right down the middle here. It doesn't really matter too much, but just for visual aid, we'll break it down to 2. So I have my staff here, and I think I'm going to show you the other very popular key signature, just so that when you're listening to a piece, if you want to try and count along with it, you'll know which type of counting to do. And that would be called 3/4 time. 3/4 time is also known as a waltz time. Waltz time, and you're going to hear that anytime anything is a waltz. I don't know if you're familiar with kind of old-fashioned dancing, but a waltz is a very kind of, well, it's a very just swishy kind of feeling of rhythm. It's very beautiful. It's very magical sounding. Oftentimes, it's very soulful. You'll hear composer Danny Elfman loves 3/4 time, and all the time signatures that sound like 3/4 time. It's just it makes you want to get up and kind of start dancing to it, and it gets the quarter note, in this case once again, quarter note gets 1 beat, and you get 3 beats per measure. So, with this you get your quarter note, still gets a beat, so it's just like all of these that we practiced earlier. Instead, though, of counting to 4 in each measure, you're only going to count to 3. The biggest difference between all of these time signatures is the emphasis that each note gets more than anything else. So you're not just going to say 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But much like you can't speak without putting certain emphasis on certain syllables, you can't really count time signatures without putting emphasis on certain beats. So, for example, 4/4 time was 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you felt the emphasis on the 1 and on the 3. In the instance of 3/4, you're only going to hear the emphasis on the 1, such as this. It makes a triangle shape when you're conducting. It goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And that kind of gives you the idea of where the notes should go. The most important note being 1, the least important note being 2. So, let's go through it. Obviously, for a whole note, in this instance, a whole note is only going to equal 3 instead of 4. Why? Because it's the whole of the measure, and the measure gets 3 beats. So your whole is going to look like this and be counted as 1. So it will sound like 1, 1, 1, 1, and so forth. So, with these whole notes, that's pretty much all there is to it. Okay. So, with these things, we've got the whole note. Now we're going to move on to the half note. Here's where it gets a little bit tricky. A half note in this instance is still going to be written as fractionally like this, right? It is a half note. Half, when you have a quarter, 1/4 note is half of a half. So you're still going to count it as double whatever beat is going to get 1. Therefore, if a quarter note, remember, a quarter note gets 1 beat here, the half note is going to get 2 beats. You always want to take your fractions when thinking of music theory based on which note gets the beat. So once again, I'll explain it once again in case you've missed that. We have a half note beat, which is literally a half note. A quarter note gets 1 beat. Half is 2 quarters. Therefore, a half note will get 2 beats because a quarter note gets 1 beat, and 1 is 2. So, in this instance, it will still get 2 beats. How do we break that down? It doesn't break down evenly, but I'll show you right now. You have your half note here. Now, in order to fill this, you have to think of your measure as a box. And it's a finite amount of space. You can only put so much in that box. However, you can break up whatever you put in that box however you like, as long as it all equals the same amount, which is 3 in this case. So the half note already takes up 2 out of the 3 beats that you're allowed in this measure. So we have the option of putting 1 quarter note, right? Because 2 plus 1 would be 3. Or we can put 2 eighth notes, because 2 plus, we'll say half of that, so it'll be half a beat. I'll put 0.5 plus 0.5 also equals 3. Or we could break it up into 16th notes. And since 16th notes are 4 quarter notes, you can do it so this looks kind of complicated, but it'll make sense on the measure. You have your 2 here, and you can put the 16th notes, you can put quarter notes or eighth notes, anything you like, as long as it equals 3. To keep things simple, we're going to use quarter notes. So I have my half note, which is 2, and I'm going to put in my quarter note, which is 1. We have 2 beats and 1 beat. So now I have 2 and 1. 2 and 1 would be 3. So now here we have 1, 2, 3. We can also flip that around. And that would be what makes rhythm interesting. We can have the 1 quarter note and then 1 half note, just like that, which would be 1, 2, 3. And you notice I put a dash here, and that is because this note gets both of these all by itself, and this 3 is all lonely, and this 1 is all lonely. It doesn't get any other counts. So what does that sound like? Well, you have your 3/4 time, and you're going to count this, and this, and this, and that. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 2. Do you hear it? I'll try it one more time. You have 1, 3, 1, 2. Yes. Okay. So, this half note, like I said, gets all of this to itself, and this little quarter note only gets that. The breaking up of all of these things is what makes rhythm rhythm. Very rarely will you have this pattern like this just repeat itself, because that's not interesting. So we'll try one more little exercise here to move on. We have the eighth notes, because we've already, we have the quarter notes. We have not done quarter notes yet. However, they're fairly simple. Okay. Now the quarter note, as I said, is very simple because the quarter note is one beat, and you can put 1 into 3 evenly. So it's not quite as complicated as the half note. The quarter note, which we'll use a little purple marker for, I think, is very simple. You get 3 of them. 3 quarter notes in the measure. So we'll go ahead and draw a little filled in bubble here. And you can draw 3 of them here. Just like that. And they all get a little tail. Just like that. Now, this is very simple to count out. I probably should have done this before bringing you into half notes, now that I'm thinking about it, but it'll just keep you even better prepared. So obviously each of these gets 1 count. And it's very simple. You have your 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, just like that. As I said, it's fairly simple. No more, no less can go in. And that's pretty much all there is to that. I think that you're fairly smart people. I think that you're very smart people. So we'll go ahead and move on. There we go. Okay. Okay. Okie dokie. Now, the next one that we'll move on to is how to count eighth notes. And thankfully, eighth notes go in evenly as well, right? Because they are half the quarter beat. And if there are 3 quarter beats that are allowed in the measure, there's going to be 6 eighth notes that are allowed in the measure. And they look a little bit like this. Okay. Now, with these, again, in this key signature, the same thing applies as before. You're never going to write anything that looks like this and call it 16th notes or 8th notes, and call it 8th notes in 3/4 or 4/4 time, ever. That's something entirely different in those two key signatures. These can happen, but they will happen in a different kind of key signature, which can be left for another day. So, however, you can break them up very similarly to the way that you broke them up in 4/4, in pairs of 2 or in groups of 4. You can either write them like this, or you can write them like this. Right? So there's that. Or you can write them like this. However, notice you still have 2 more. In this case, you cannot continue them on in that bar. What you're going to have to do is break them up again, for the most common way that you would see it. So once again, it would just look like that. Okay? And the way that you would count that would be very similar to the way that you counted in the other one, in 4/4. However, this time, of course, giving it 3 beats per measure. So you would count it thusly. You'd say 1 and 2, 1 and 2 and 3, 1 and 2 and 3, and it's very much the same as 4/4 time. Now, the 16th notes are roughly the same thing, and I'll go ahead and go over them with you briefly just so you can see what they look like. And then I have one more little fancy thing to go over with you, and another term. And I think that that should just about make your minds explode with information. Okie dokie. So that's gonna look just like that. Well, it's fine, there's nothing to do about it. I have to keep going. Okay, and we'll redraw these little lines. I apologize for the little buzz you may hear from next door. Unfortunately, there's not a lot I can do about that. So, here, just for the purposes of being able to write it out for you, I've condensed this down to 1 measure, just as I did before. Now, with 16th notes, you're going to notice that it's half of this, which is half of this, half of this, half of this. So a 16th note is in 3/4 time if there are 6 8th notes, there will be a total of 12 16th notes. So it will look like this. I'm going to write it in a different color, actually, because I like colors. Okay. So we'll go ahead and give it 1, 2, 3, 4, And again, you can attach them. You can leave them singular, like so. And there is nothing wrong with that. Or you can attach them in doubles, once again with a double bar. Or you can go ahead and attach them all together in groups of 4, just like that. Any of these methods is correct and okay. However, you may see certain methods more often than the other ones. And this method, this will be counted out thusly. Again, you have the 1 E and so it would be 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and I'll go ahead and write a little bar between these so that you can see the difference. These go here, these go here, and these go here. So it would be counted out thusly with if you have your time signature here, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and that would be all of these little 16th notes. Now, as I explained before, you can keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller with 32nd notes, 64th notes, etc., but the most common ones are going to be the ones that I've shown here. So there's one last type of rhythm I'd like to show you, and it's a little bit deceptive, which is why I want to point it out. And I'll go ahead and take us back into 4/4 time for this one. And this last little sneaky one is called a triplet. And a triplet is kind of a way of faking a 3/4 time when you're writing in a 4/4 time. When you don't feel like actually changing the entire time signature just for a few notes. A triplet, when I say triplet, you'll find out why. A triplet looks like this. And the way that you'll know that that's what the triplet is because it has that little 3 above it. And sometimes the 3 will have little legs next to it, and sometimes it won't. It just depends on the type of composition you're looking at. So for a triplet, we'll go ahead and draw out our time signature here. So here's our little treble clef. Once again. That's a nice looking one. And we'll draw it all the way out here. Just like that. Perfect. And I apologize again for my non-ruler hands. So, here we go. And we'll give it 2 measures. And we'll go ahead and write it once again in 4/4. I keep not giving that 4 much justice. Okay. here we are in 4/4 with our treble clef and our measure 1 and measure 2. And I'll go ahead and draw the triplet in blue. Now, the triplet's a little tricky. Triplets always, when they're just regular triplets, and again this may change in certain cases, but for the most part, 9 times out of 10, a triplet equals 1 beat. It gets 1 beat all to itself.
I apologize for them being off.
So in the case of 4/4, we need, it gets 4 beats, so we need 4 of these bad boys. So we're going to go ahead and draw it, just like
And
that.
triplets are actually kind of fun, really. Like that, and you have to include the little 3, or else it just isn't a triplet.
And I apologize for them being a little small. But we'll go ahead and
So,
just
these are each triplets,
draw the little tails here.
and there's 2 ways to say them.
Little,
You can either say triplet, or you can say the beat, and the word
And triplets are
you can
actually
say
kind
1
of fun.
triplet, 2 triplet, 3
Really.
triplet, 4 triplet, and even as I say it, you can kind of hear how
like that.
it
And you
sounds
have to include
like
the little
it's
3,
3/4,
or else it
even
just
though we're
isn't
still
a
in
triplet.
4/4.
You just look like
So,
you don't know what you're writing. So,
I'll go
these are
ahead and
each
write,
triplets.
uh,
And there's 2 ways to say them. You can either say triplet, or you can say the beat and the
Go
word
ahead and write it
triplets.
as
You'd say
beat,
1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4
just
triplet.
like that, because I'm not going
And
to be able to fit
even
the
as I
word.
say it, you can
all the
kind
way
of
in
hear
there.
how it sounds
So we have
like it's 3/4, even though we're still in 4/4. So,
3
I'll go ahead and write
triplet, 4 triplet, and you have to count it as a triplet.
I'll go ahead and write it as
So,
the beat
in 4/4, we have it
triplet,
going 1,
just like that, because I'm not going to be able to fit the word all the way in here.
triplets sound like
So
this.
we have
1
1
triplet, 2 triplet, 3
triplet,
triplet, 4 triplet,
2
1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4
3
triplet.
triplet,
And it gives it kind of a more
triplet.
dancey, kind of jaunty feel to it. But don't be
And
deceived.
you have to
When
count it as a
it's still in
triplet.
4.
So, in 4/4, we have it going 1,
So, yeah,
2,
so that's all one
3,
measure.
4.
And the reason I brought up
2.
triplets was not to
Triplets
throw
sound like
you
this.
a
1
curveball,
triplet, 2
but it was to show
triplet,
you
3
why
triplet, 4 triplet, 1
these 2
triplet,
have to
2
be paired
triplet,
in
3
twos and
triplet,
4s
4
in
triplet.
most cases. Because when you're
And
writing
it gives
this,
it kind of a more
somebody might miss the little
dancey,
three
kind
not
of
being
jaunty
there and try
feel
count
to it. But don't be deceived when you're listening. It's still in 4/4.
So yeah, I think I've given you
So
an
yeah, so
entire
that's all
semester's
one
worth of
measure.
rhythm information.
And the reason I brought up
Um,
triplets was not to
I will be
throw
doing
you
one more,
a curveball,
uh,
but it was to
tutorials
show
kind
you
of go a little
why
more in depth with
these 2 have to be paired in
you're
2s
interested.
and 4s in most
In the
cases.
meantime, I do hope that you've enjoyed
Because when you're writing
little
this,
tutorial here.
somebody might miss the little
And
3 not
I
being
look
there
forward to
and try
seeing
to
you
count
again
it
very soon.
as a triplet, and that
Take care.
just won't work as well. So yeah, I think I've given you an entire semester's worth of rhythm information. I will be doing one more tutorial to kind of go a little more in depth with rhythm, if you're interested. In the meantime, I do hope that you've enjoyed this little tutorial here, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Okay, take care. Good night.